The land that swallowed Anna Clay was a place of stone and hunger, its rivers thin as dying veins, its sky yawning open like a grave that never closed. It was the year 1854, and the Dakota Territory was not yet tamed, not even by the men who called themselves settlers and believed guns and whiskey could sow civilization into bone-dry earth. Anna's father had been one of them, but different in his quiet way. He built their cabin where the cottonwoods leaned against the river, careful not to cut more trees than needed, careful to give wide respect to the Sioux bands that hunted farther north. He taught Anna the slow art of listening, listening to the whine of the wind through the ravines, the shift of hoofbeats over packed dirt, the secret grief in a man's voice when he thought he was alone. He died slow, coughing blood into the grass one spring when a fever passed through. Anna buried him herself at the tree line, marking his grave with a cairn of river stones. She was 13 years old. For a while, she survived on the stores he'd taught her to keep: dried venison, beans, salted corn. She traded sometimes with the Sioux, whose old women pitied her hollow cheeks and wary eyes, but always she went back to the cabin alone, wary of the larger camps growing to the south and west. That's where the settlers came next. The Freeman brothers, all five of them, swaggered through the valley with wagons heavy with stolen cattle and crates of glass-bottled liquor. They built a ramshackle town from scavenged wood and set up a saloon where the river bent sharpest. Their leader, Tom Freeman, was a man with a bad smile, the kind that made dogs tuck their tails and flee. He wore a preacher's hat to mock the dead reverend he'd shot 2 counties over. Anna first crossed their path when she came to trade for ammunition. She wore her father's old coat, too big for her slight shoulders, and carried the rifle that was almost longer than she was tall. Tom Freeman laughed when he saw her. "A little crow come down from the hills," he said, grinning wide enough to show the rot between his teeth. "What do you reckon she wants, boys? Our silver, our kisses." The other men jeered, elbowing each other like boys spotting a stray pup on the road. Anna said nothing. She laid the bundle of pelts on the saloon's plank bar and pointed to a box of cartridges. Tom sauntered closer, close enough she could smell the sour mash on his breath. He tapped her under the chin with 2 fingers. "Little bird's got claws," he said. "Think she knows how to use that rifle or just likes play and dress up?" They laughed again, the sound brittle as ice cracking. Anna's mouth stayed hard. She took her cartridges and left without a word. But the shape of the laughter followed her all the way back to her cabin, and it carved something inside her that would not mend. They came to her cabin 3 nights later. The Freemans and their hangers-on rode in drunk, whooping and firing shots into the dark. They kicked down the door, trampling the single cross Anna had carved for her father's memory. She fought, but they laughed at that too, tossing her aside like a rag doll. They ransacked what little she had, taking the rifle, the food, the skins, even the coat that still held her father's scent. When they left, they set fire to the cabin for good measure. Anna crawled from the smoke on hands and knees, coughing up blackness. She watched the flames devour the only home she had known. She wept then, sitting among the charred grass, her body a lattice of bruises and burns. Her tears drew no pity. The settlers watched from their horses, lit by the fire they had made, and they laughed, a hard, gleeful sound that stuck to her skin like ash. When dawn came, she was alone again. But she was not broken. Anna Clay walked north that morning, wrapped in a blanket of rage so pure it numbed the hurt from her body. She followed the river into the hills, into country no settler dared cross, where the Sioux still moved with the seasons and old ghosts stirred in the canyons. She disappeared from the world that day, but she did not die. The settlers forgot her soon enough, busy with their drinking and stealing and building their filthy little town by the river. They should have known better. Something had been born in the fire, something that carried Anna's tears like seeds, planting them deep in the stone. And it was growing. The high hills past the river held no kindness. The wind there tore at flesh like a living thing, and the stones seemed to whisper threats to any who dared linger. But Anna Clay did not come seeking kindness. She came seeking something older, colder. For days she wandered, a shadow in buckskin stolen from a line left drying by the river camps. Her feet bled into her moccasins, her ribs carved hollows beneath her skin. She survived on chokecherries and strips of dried rabbit, on whatever the land begrudgingly gave. On the 6th day, when the sky turned the color of bruised fruit, she stumbled into a clearing cut deep in the hills. There she found them, Sioux hunters returning from the plains, their ponies heavy with buffalo hides, their faces drawn with suspicion at the sight of her. At first they circled her like wolves testing the strength of a crippled deer. Anna stood still, arms lowered, throat raw from thirst. She spoke no words, she simply knelt and laid her hands flat in the dirt, head bowed low. An old woman approached her then, her braids gray as smoke, her eyes bright and sharp as obsidian. Without a word, the woman reached down and took Anna's wrists, turning them over to see the burns, the bruises, the stubborn cuts still weeping blood. She let out a grunt, neither pity nor welcome, and beckoned Anna to follow. They did not name her. They gave her no fire to sit by, no songs to hear. She was a thing half dead and unproven, and in their law such a thing must either wither or survive. So Anna learned. She learned to snare rabbits with twine made from sinew, to strip hides with flint so sharp it could shave a breath. She learned the slow patience of tanning, the quick ferocity of gutting a deer before rot set in. The old woman, whom the others called Woman Who Remembers, taught her in glances and sharp slaps, not in words. She taught her how to move unseen, how to listen to the trees for signs of others moving. She taught her the herbs that staved off fever, the bitter roots that sharpened the senses. Through it all, Anna never spoke of the settlers or the fire. She buried that part of herself deep, letting it ferment into something bitter and potent. She grew stronger on it, hardened by it. Each night, when the stars opened like frost flowers overhead, she lay awake and plotted the long work of her vengeance. The Freeman brothers did not know it yet, but Anna was writing their deaths into the sky, one broken star at a time. Seasons turned. Snow came, heavy and blinding, then melted into floods that carved new scars into the land. Anna moved among the Sioux like a ghost, unclaimed but tolerated. She fought for her place with silence and skill, never asking, never offering. When she was 16, she killed her first man. A trapper, Dutch by the look of him, cornered her near the river bend one misty morning. He thought her an easy prize, a slip of a girl half-starved and alone. She lured him into the willows and slit his throat with a blade honed from bone, holding his gasping mouth shut as he kicked and clawed the muddy ground. She took his rifle, his boots, his powder horn. She buried his body under a tangle of wild grapevines where the soil stayed soft. It was not the killing that changed her. It was how easy it had been. By the time the first saloon fires were seen smudging the southern horizon, Anna Clay had become something the Sioux respected, if not fully trusted, a spirit of bad fortune, a girl with death braided into her hair. The settlers had not stopped growing their rotten little town. More wagons came, bringing tin signs, clapboard churches, and men with too much greed and too little sense. They felled the cottonwoods, poisoned the streams with runoff, hunted the herds near to nothing. And the Freeman brothers grew fatter and crueler at the center of it all. Tom Freeman had taken to calling himself mayor, as if the title could wash the blood from his hands. His brothers, Cal, Jade, Amos, and little Silas, each carved their own kingdoms from the suffering of others. They took what they wanted, land, livestock, daughters. No law touched them. No preacher dared chastise them. Anna watched from the hills. She learned the rhythms of the town, the shifts in guard, the nights the brothers drank deepest. She mapped every alley, every weak timber, every coward hiding behind a pistol. But revenge, she knew, was a harvest that ripened only with patience. First, she needed to make them afraid. Not of bullets, not of blades. Of something they could not see or shoot. Something that would rot their bones from the inside out, before they even knew death was riding for them. Anna Clay was no longer a girl. She was a reckoning. And she was coming. The first to die was Amos Freeman. It happened in late spring, when the river swelled and carried branches like broken ribs downstream. Amos had taken a habit of riding out alone to trap muskrats along the backwater sloughs, thinking the town too cowed to ever raise a hand against him. Anna found him there, knee-deep in the reedy shallows, cursing at a sprung trap. She watched from the cattails, unseen, a smear of mud and blood against the green. When he turned, she fired. The musket ball caught him in the throat, snapping his head back in a crimson spray. He staggered, made a wet gurgle of confusion, and collapsed into the muck. His body twitched once, twice, then floated face down among the reeds. Anna waded out and pressed his head under with the barrel of her rifle until the bubbles stopped. She left him there, bloated and pale, for the others to find. In town, they said it was Indians. They said it was a punishment for trespassing, and for a few uneasy days the settlers kept indoors after dusk. But men like Tom Freeman did not fear for long. He gathered his brothers and the roughest of his men, and they rode into the hills, burning Sioux camps they found, shooting into the brush, leaving corpses hanging from cottonwoods as warnings. Anna watched it all with a hollow kind of patience. Vengeance was a river. It could not be dammed by more cruelty. It only rose higher. Next was Jade Freeman. Jade was the meanest of them, a man who liked to leave his mark on whatever he touched. His favorite haunt was the Broken Lantern Saloon, a place where the floor was always slick with spilled whiskey and old blood. Anna waited for the night he'd drink himself stupid, waited until the fiddler packed up and the barmaids dragged their broken smiles back to their bunks. She slipped into the saloon after dark, a knife hidden up her sleeve, a pouch of ground nightshade tucked in her belt. Jade lay passed out in the corner, mouth open, boots still on. She poured the powder into his whiskey bottle, careful, quick, silent. By morning, Jade Freeman's body was found sprawled in the street, foam caked at the corners of his mouth, eyes wide and sightless. The town doctor, bribed long ago by Freeman's silver, muttered about bad liquor, about curses, about the wrath of God. None dared say what they all felt creeping up their spines. Something had changed. Tom Freeman buried his brother with no ceremony, no prayers. He posted men at the corners of the town, ordered whippings for any Sioux found within rifle shot, tightened his grip on the settlers still clinging to his rule. But fear was a wound that festered. Stores closed early, doors were barred at sundown. The church, built by trembling hands, stood empty even on Sundays. Anna was not done. She moved through the fields and gullies like smoke, breaking trap lines, poisoning wells, stealing cattle. She left signs carved into trees, symbols she learned from woman who remembers, marks meant to summon dread. A broken hand, an empty cradle, an eye gouged out. Some settlers packed their wagons and fled east, swearing they saw a ghost in the woods, a witch riding the mists. Others huddled closer to the Freemans, hoping proximity to power would buy safety. It never did. Cal Freeman died in the middle of a clear, bright afternoon. He was riding fence along the north pasture, alone but singing loud to keep the fear at bay. He never heard the shot that took him behind the ear, neat and clean. Anna stripped his body of his gun belt and spurs, tying them to the grave marker she drove into the ground at the town's main road. A warning, plain enough for even a drunk to read. One Freeman left now. Tom Freeman, the biggest wolf, the one whose laughter had echoed loudest that night by the burning cabin. He felt it now, the slow, inevitable tightening of the noose around his neck. He stopped riding out. He posted armed guards around his house, men paid double for their fear. He drank more, shouted more, whipped the whores and barkeeps and ranch hands who dared look at him wrong. In the nights he dreamed of fire and smoke, and a girl's face hidden behind a veil of ash. Anna waited. She was no longer the hollow-eyed child they had dragged into the dirt. She had grown lean and strong, her muscles braided tight with purpose. Her hands were steady as stone. Her heart beat slow, deliberate, patient as a hunting cat crouched at a den mouth. She was the last thing Tom Freeman would ever see. And he would not see her coming. The town of Bracken Hollow shriveled under a sky that seemed to press closer with each passing day. Dust scoured the streets, rattling broken shutters, sifting into the mouths of men who once shouted with bravado and now muttered prayers between clenched teeth. Tom Freeman locked himself in the old courthouse he had claimed for his manor, draping windows with heavy hides, posting men with rifles at every door. He wore his pistols to bed, slept in a chair facing the entry, ears straining against the heavy silence. Hey, no. Every creak of the timbers, every whip of the wind, every distant coyote call sounded like death coming for him. His guards watched too, but no amount of silver could harden a man's spine against the feeling of being hunted by something not bound by rules or fear. Anna Clay circled Bracken Hollow like a hawk over dying rabbits. She didn't strike immediately, she let rot set in. She tampered with the food stores, cutting through barrels of flour with powdered lye. She slipped through the barns at night, slitting the throats of oxen and horses, letting their blood pool sticky in the straw. She left tokens at the thresholds of the strongest homes, a child's shoe, a crow feather slick with grease, a bone charm cracked through the center. The town crumbled inward. Fights broke out in the street over nothing. Men shot each other over imagined insults, their nerves stretched to snapping. A fever took the children first, then the women. Those strong enough to ride fled under cover of darkness, too terrified to even bury their dead. Tom Freeman stood at the eye of it all, more alone each day. Anna watched from the ridge. She marked his routines, saw the growing frenzy in the way he barked orders, the desperate gleam in his bloodshot eyes. He had lost everything but the false weight of his own violence, and even that was slipping from his grasp. The old Sioux woman her remembers, had once told Anna, "A man who kills from fear leaves more cracks in his soul than a frozen river in thaw." Now Tom Freeman was all cracks, held together by a crumbling pride and the memory of power. Anna knew it was time. She made her move on a night when the wind howled so loud no dog barked, no rooster crowed. She slipped through the tangle of abandoned alleys, a ghost in the torn remnants of settler clothing, her hair braided back tight against her skull, her hands steady on the rifle she had polished for this day. 2 guards stood at the courthouse entrance, their faces gaunt, their fingers trembling on the triggers of their carbines. Anna felled the first with a knife to the throat, fast and clean. The second turned, mouth open in alarm, but Anna shot him through the heart before he could cry out. The door to the courthouse creaked open at her touch. Inside, the air stank of sweat, whiskey, and fear. Oil lamps guttered along the walls, casting leaping shadows that seemed to dance with anticipation. She found Tom Freeman sitting behind a makeshift desk, a scatter of gold coins and empty bottles before him. His pistols were drawn, shaking in each hand. His face, once ruddy and full of cruelty, was gray, sagging, eyes wild with sleepless terror. "You," he rasped, voice dry as old bark. Anna stepped forward, rifle loose in her hands, her boots whispering across the dusty floorboards. "Me," she said. The word cracked through the room like a bullet. It was the first thing she had said aloud to him since that night by the burning cabin. Tom fired, a wild shot that splintered the doorframe behind her. Anna didn't flinch. She raised her rifle and shot him through the right knee. Tom screamed, dropping one gun to clutch at the ruin of his leg. Blood poured out in pulses, soaking the floor. He tried to crawl, dragging himself backward across the boards, leaving a thick red trail. "Please," he sobbed, "please, I—" Anna knelt over him, pressing the barrel of her rifle against his heaving chest. "Do you remember laughing?" she asked, voice calm, almost curious. Tom wept openly now, a man reduced to meat, to a whimpering shape without dignity. "I remember," Anna said, "every time you laughed." She pulled the trigger. Tom Freeman's body jerked once, then sagged still. His blood pooled outward, a dark stain devouring the floor beneath him. Anna stood slowly, breathing deep the smell of iron and smoke. She walked out into the night without looking back. Bracken Hollow was dead. Nothing grew from salted earth. Nothing sang in a graveyard of broken souls. Anna didn't stay to watch the final collapse. She rode north, past the charred remains of the church, past the crumbling saloon, past the house where a child's shoe still hung from a nailed doorpost. The stars turned cold and sharp overhead, watching her pass. In the hills, the Sioux still moved with the seasons, and among them, rumors would stir of a girl who had risen from ash and blood, who had torn down a kingdom built on cruelty, who carried a silence more terrible than any war cry. Anna Clay never returned to Bracken Hollow. There was nothing left for her there. Nothing but bones. The northern plains opened before Anna like a scar, stitched with dry riverbeds and lonely bluffs. Spring bled into summer, and the grass rose tall enough to brush her thighs as she rode, nameless and faceless beyond the ruins of Bracken Hollow. Word traveled faster than horses. Settlers whispered of a wraith who had broken the Freeman's hold, who walked away from fire and death without a second glance. Some said it was a spirit summoned by the Sioux. others that it was the devil's daughter, fed on grief and hardened by vengeance. Anna let the stories grow wild behind her. She found no comfort among the towns that clung to the frontier like lichen on stone. Their dirt streets and blind-eyed sheriffs reeked of the same rot she had already burned away once. Every church bell sounded hollow. Every smile hid calculation. So she kept moving. Through sun that boiled the ground into mirages, through storms that peeled the skin from the earth, she moved without tether. Her name meant nothing now, even to herself. Only the memory of a fire and the laughter that had cost her everything stayed sharp in her mind. In the deep country where maps frayed into myth, she met traders who spoke of gold further west and soldiers building forts atop the bones of old villages. She heard of new towns rising like pustules in the valleys, each promising a second chance at ruin. Anna did not stop. Her rifle grew worn in her hands. Her boots split and were patched with sinew and cloth. She learned to read the stars not for hope, but for direction, for escape. And sometimes, in the blue hush before dawn, she dreamed. Not of Bracken Hollow or of the men she had laid in the earth, but of the cabin before it burned, the smell of cedar smoke, the creak of her father's chair, the low murmur of river water against the stones. Waking was always a fresh wound. Years passed. Anna crossed into lands where neither the law nor the Sioux held sway. Mountain ranges knuckled against the horizon, jagged and raw. The sky there seemed thinner, the air colder even at the height of summer. In a narrow valley where the grass bowed low and white flowers grew like patches of snow, she built a small shelter from stone and hide. It was no cabin, it had no carved cross above the hearth. But it kept out the worst of the storms, and the fire she built each night warmed her hands enough to remind her she was still alive. She did not take in travelers. She left no markers on the land. Only the crows knew her trail, and they were wise enough to keep their secrets. Some seasons she trapped, others she hunted. She became a figure whispered about by the few who dared pass near her valley, a witch woman, they said, who lived alone with the wolves, whose eyes were like river ice, and who spoke the old tongue of death. Anna cared nothing for the names they gave her. Names were for those who needed to be known. She had been known once, and it had cost her everything. At night she sat by her fire and mended her gear with fingers toughened by cold and blood. The stars wheeled overhead, uncaring. Sometimes she would hum, tuneless and soft, a scrap of melody from a time before the fire. She did not remember the words anymore, only the shape of them, the hollow where they had once lived. She had taken her justice, she had survived. But justice and survival were lonely companions. She would never be a settler's wife, a mother, a face behind lace curtains. She would never kneel in a church pew or laugh without remembering the sound of it twisting into cruelty. These things had been burned out of her, the way fire clears a field of everything soft and green. In the final tally, Anna Clay had been the last one laughing, just as the world deserved. But her laughter was a dry thing now, brittle and rare as winter grass. And she carried it alone into the endless dark, a flame banked low, stubborn, and unyielding.